Kia ora koutou, nā mai haere mai ki tēnei hui, ko Mark Osborne tōku ingoa. Great to have you with us for the second of our webinar series on accelerating teacher inquiry. Those of you that are new to this webinar and didn't make the last one, we focused on the power of marginal gains, used the summary or the story of Dave Brailsford and his work with the Great Britain cycling team. We also talked about creating a smart risk-taking culture. If you weren't part of that webinar, it's available online, so make sure that you go back and check that out. I think it's a really great story. We'll just settle us in for with karakia, kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa paunamu te moana, hei hurahi mā tātou i te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou, ia tātou katoa, huye, tai ki e. As I said in the last session, this is me, Mark Osborne, educator, teacher, leadership coach, consultant, passionate advocate of teaching as inquiry or continuous improvement. And that brings us here today to focus on bias and the brain, the fabulous mechanism that we have between our ears, but also some of its shortcomings or limitations. And a reminder that this is part 2 of a 5-part series. We are also going to look at quality inquiry questions. We're going to look at data-informed decision-making and effective intervention. Those 5 things, a culture, when we add in bias in the brain, and a culture of smart risk-taking, those are the 5 key failure points, the common failure points of teaching inquiry. And so that's why we focus on those. By the end of the session, what I'm anticipating is that you'll be able to identify and explain the impact that cognitive biases have on our deep analysis, particularly within teacher inquiry. There are 6 common biases that we're going to look at. And also, most importantly, how can you put this information to work to be able to identify and implement some routines or structural safeguards, things you might do for yourself, but also within a collaborative inquiry group, a PLG, professional learning group, to be able to minimize the impact of those biases. My starting point here is that the human being's brain is quite amazing, but it has 1 or 2 flaws, 1 or 2 shortcomings, and we want to look at what those things are. And in order to get us there, I'm going to give you a little quiz. We started the last webinar with some brain teasers, with some rebus puzzles. I'm going to do the same thing by giving you some quick fire brain teasers. There's a purpose to this. And so, as well as seeing if you can come up with the right answer, I'm going to reveal what it reveals about our brain once we finish. So I'm going to give you 45 seconds to answer these 4 brain teasers. If you're sitting next to someone, work on it together. If not, then just grab a piece of paper and see if you can quickly jot down the answer to them. Ready, steady, go. Bat and the ball costs $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much is the ball? Clock's ticking. Should be moving on to the last one. Ten seconds to go. And we are done. I'm not sure how many of you I caught out with those 4 brain teasers, because you've probably seen them before. If you've been around, you might have noticed some of them. My rather unhelpful talking through that 45 seconds added a little more pressure, and I was reminding you of the clock counting down. What I was doing was trying to put your brain into fast mode. I was trying to add a little bit of pressure to get you to think rather than in an analytical way, in a quick, fast, responsive way. The answer to those brain teasers: bat and the ball costs $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much is the ball? The fast answer, the tempting answer, is that the ball's 10 cents, because together they make $1.10. But actually the correct answer is 5 cents. And I'm sure many of you have seen that one before. In the lake, lily pads double every day. 48 is half. Well, what's half of 48? That's 24. So you would think 24, but actually if they double each day, day 47 is half full, double half is full. So it's day 47 is the answer. How many animals did Moses take on the ark? Again, probably have to choose a different one to fool you. Moses didn't take any animals on the ark. Noah did. And 5 machines, 5 minutes, 5 widgets, 10 machines, 10 widgets. You would think, 100 machines, 100 widgets, 100 minutes, but actually it's 5 minutes, because if a machine takes 5 minutes to make a widget and you've got 100 of them, after 5 minutes you've got 100 widgets. So those are brain teasers that are designed to get your brain into fast thinking mode. This is Daniel Kahneman, and he's a Nobel Prize winning psychologist. He's a very well renowned, regarded psychologist. Just to prove that, I like him too, there's my copy of the book. He first proposed the idea of fast brain and slow brain in his book, Fast Thinking and Slow Thinking. Fast thinking, what I've just asked you to do, is quick, instinctual, and it's actually survival based. I'll go into that in a moment, a little bit more. Slow thinking is deeper, it's analytical, it's often more accurate. And so when we're engaging in teaching as inquiry or deep analysis of data, we need to be using our slow thinking brain. The problem with that is that our brains are hardwired for fast thinking. We prefer fast thinking. It's easier for us to engage in fast thinking. That's why those easier answers to those brain teasers are so tempting. If we're going to engage in deep analysis, and I suggest that we should use deep analysis when we're engaging in teaching inquiry, we have to understand our brains, understand there's a temptation to move into fast thinking, and deliberately disengage that fast mode to move it into slow mode or slow thinking. I want to rewind and just talk about how our brains got to the point where they prefer fast thinking over slow thinking. And if this was a Marvel movie, this would be the origin story. Back on the literal or metaphorical savannah, our brains, our ancestors' brains evolved to detect threats quickly, to conserve energy, to speed up the process of thinking so that you could redirect your energy to other things like walking and surviving. And we needed to make really fast decisions, even when we were uncertain. So from an evolution perspective, speed was more important than accuracy. Another way of thinking about it, if you're on the savannah and you see a little bit of movement in the grass, you haven't got time to run some sort of deep root cause analysis or some sort of probability test. You just have to decide really quickly, is that a predator or is that the wind? And we make quick snap judgments using these synaptic shortcuts. And so the catchphrase here is, you were either a fast thinker or you were lunch. And that over thousands of years, over generations, got faster and faster. So our preference is for faster thinking. Fast thinking relies on efficiency. We've got to be quick. Our brains have got to take a lot of shortcuts rather than go laboriously through every possibility. So that's this idea of synaptic shortcuts, our brain's shortcuts. So for example, a synaptic shortcut is typically $1 less than $1.10 is normally 10 cents, not 5 cents, which is where we catch ourselves on the bat and the ball problem. Or if we're talking about animals and the ark, it's probably Noah. And we skip over the fact that Moses was in the question. Or 5 and 5 and 5, or 5 times 5 equals 5, normally means 100 times 100 equals 100. But actually, that means 5 rather than 100. So fast thinking is our default. But if we know how it works, we can mitigate the effect that it has on our thinking. So what are the main synaptic shortcuts that limit deep analysis? What are the things that prevent us from deeply understanding a challenge? It might be a classroom challenge, a problem of practice. If we don't deeply understand it, it's likely that we're going to come up with incorrect answers. I'm going to use a couple of psychology experiments, actually from Kahneman, from Daniel Kahneman. and they illustrate one of the synaptic shortcuts that our brains typically engage in. So let's imagine you and I were in a coin tossing competition. If you correctly call, I'll flip the coin, but if you correctly call it, I'm going to give you $10. Would you enter into that game with me? The answer is probably yes, because that's free money. Every time you get it right, you get $10. No brainer. However, if I then change the rules and say, if you get it wrong, you owe me $10, the vast majority of people won't actually go into that. Even though we know that if we did that 100 times or 1,000 times, you're probably going to come out even. The reason that people don't like to go into that situation with those odds is the possibility of loss. It's possible that after 3 flips of the coin, you're going to owe me $30. And for most people, they won't agree to that for the possibility that they might lose something. And so then I might say, okay, well, let's play this game. How about I sweeten the pot a little bit? If you lose, it's still $10. But if you get it right, what if I gave you $20? Would you enter into that game? Interestingly, I probably would, but interestingly, most people wouldn't enter in those odds. For the vast majority of people, the odds needed to be 3-1. So you need to get $30 for a win, but only lose $10 for a loss. From my point of view, I'm not happy to go into that because I think I'm going to lose money. But what it goes to show is that the gains need to be quite significant and strong for people to outweigh the possibility of loss. Human beings don't like loss. And that factors into things like teaching as inquiry and deep analysis. Here's another example. We've got a choice. Everybody on the webinar, everybody here, we can play a game where everybody has a 90% chance of winning $1,000. I like that. I like those odds. Or a different game, option B, we can say guaranteed money, everyone gets $500. Which one would you go for? Because the vast majority of people would go with option B. Even though across all of us on the webinar, everybody here, you're likely to get more money if you vote for option A. 90% chance of $1,000. It's again the possibility that you might be in the 10%. You might lose out. You might get nothing. Another one, another experiment. What we don't like doing when we go into analysis is losing. And so how does that relate to teaching as inquiry? It relates to teaching as inquiry because we have an established level of achievement in our class. And if we're suggesting as part of an inquiry, we should make changes to that practice, the possibility exists that those changes won't be successful and we'll lose the current achievement levels in our class. And that's how loss aversion or a tendency to avoid loss can impact on teaching as inquiry. What I started to play around with when I explored these ideas was the idea of Cluedo. So there's a baddie there. Loss aversion is a baddie. They're a person who can limit our thinking, or they can sabotage our thinking. So I've played around with this idea for a bit. Rather than who killed Colonel Mustard, it's who sabotaged my thinking. And it might be loss aversion that is sabotaging your deep analysis in your inquiry, your desire to hold on to what you currently have rather than risk it for new practice. That new practice might actually get you some really beneficial results for your students, but we have to get past the loss aversion in order to be able to get there. What is loss aversion's crime? What is it guilty of? A tendency to avoid new things, new practices because of fears about losing what we've already got. Human beings hate losses more than they love gains. That is pretty well established by Kahneman and a bunch of other people. We hate losses more than we love gains. You're not going to try anything new. How does that impact on teaching as inquiry? Well, the fear of losing our current achievement levels, our levels of confidence or levels of comfort might discourage a team from trying new approaches. We stick to the tried and true. We're reluctant to give up what we currently have. So loss aversion impacts on our decision making. Here's a second set of experiments. These are known as the Ash conformity experiments. And I remember these from anybody as old as me would remember them from Candid Camera. In Candid Camera, one of the gags that they set up was a lift opening, and if everybody was facing the back of the lift when the new person that walked in, typically they would face the back of the lift as well. Literally, there's one poor guy with a hat there, the rest of them are actors. And when they turn around and face the front, he will turn around and face the back. If the people in the lift are facing the side, then typically we will turn and face the side as well. And they're hilarious and funny, and let's see what we can get people to do through conformity. Another example, which was a clinical example, was you get 10 people in the room, one of which was the actual participant, the other 9 were actors. And they would say, which of these lines most closely matches the target line? I can see that line C closely matches the target line in length. But if the 9 actors in the room said before I was asked the question, A, it's A, line A is the closest one, line A, line A, line A, and then it comes to me, there's a 70% chance that I am going to agree with the people who came before me and say line A, even when I know that it's line C. And that's why these have come to be known as the ASH conformity experiments. Conformity is another synaptic shortcut. It's another cognitive bias that can affect our thinking. It's groupthink. And what we tend to do, even the participants, when they're interviewed afterwards in the ASH conformity experiments, they were asked, well, you knew that it was line C. Why did you say A? Typically, they said, I didn't want to stand out. I just wanted to keep the peace. I just wanted to go along with everyone else. And that is a really good example of groupthink. So the crime, groupthink crime, is a tendency for groups, think of professional learning groups, inquiry groups, to prioritize consensus and harmony. We want to agree. No one wants to be that guy that's kind of sticking out and being annoying and difficult. And so we tend to prioritize harmony over critical evaluation. Sometimes that means we will have a dissenting view, but we will keep it to ourselves. And the impact, of course, on a professional inquiry group is that early opinions, especially those from influential members, often become amplified and reinforced by others in the group, while alternative interpretations or dissenting views remain unspoken. So the catchphrase for this one is, loud wrong can beat quiet right. You've got maybe a really important perspective or view to bring to this conversation. It's likely, or it's possible, that you will suppress that because you just want to get along with the group. It's well intended, but it will ultimately limit our thinking. So loss aversion and groupthink are two of the cognitive biases that can limit the impact of analysis, particularly with teaching as inquiry. Here's another one. Status quo bias. That guy looks really comfortable there, smoking his pipe. I'm very comfortable with the status quo, very comfortable with how things are currently. Status quo bias is a tendency to latch on to things that confirm what we already believe. Or maybe a better way of describing it is, we tend to stick with our beliefs about the way things currently are. We're reluctant to give up our current practices instead of testing new approaches. It limits our ability to improve because it keeps us within a really safe zone. Recency bias relates to how recent the data is that we have. Recency bias believes that if the assessment took place yesterday, it's therefore more accurate and more valid and more reliable than the assessment that took place last week or 2 weeks ago. The newer the data, the more accurate it is. And what the problem with that is that if you over-prioritize the most recent data, the kids might have had a bad day, they might have had a great day, they might have been cheating off the kid next to them. If you say this recent data has to be the best data, then you're not looking at longer term trends or the general direction of travel. So don't fall into the habit of thinking that because it's recent, it must therefore be right. Confirmation bias. I think I had this definition in status quo bias, actually. Yeah. We tend to seek, interpret, and emphasize information that confirms existing beliefs, dismissing contrary or contradictory evidence. Confirmation, I think I know what's going on here. Let me cherry pick that evidence that supports that view, and I'll dismiss anything that disagrees with that view. And the impact is that teams can selectively notice data that supports their existing beliefs, beliefs or assumptions about particular students, or the impact of teaching strategies. This strategy always works. See, I told you, those 3 kids are making really good progress because of this strategy. The other 20 odd in your class are not making progress, but you're cherry picking some useful examples. Rather than genuinely inquiring and validating those views and investigating them deeply. So confirmation bias, I think I know what's going on here. And then the last one is the ostrich effect. The ostrich effect is burying your head in the sand, because we don't like the news that's coming. So we will avoid, ignore, delay any confronting negative or threatening information, even if it's really, really important. The impact of this is that what we tend to do is avoid analyzing difficult data. I think I'm a great teacher of writing. I take a lot of pride in it. I work hard at it. And if the writing data for my class isn't very good, I'm just going to bury my head in the sand about the fact that it might be suggesting I'm not quite as good a teacher of writing as I think I am. I'm probably going to externalize and just say, there's a problem with the kids, or the assessment wasn't very accurate, or something else was going on. I'm still a good teacher of writing. I'm going to bury my head in the sand around that. This is confronting. This is challenging, because for all of us, we want to feel like we do a good job, but also there is times where we've got to confront some uncomfortable things. So there they are. Loss aversion, groupthink, status quo bias, recency bias, confirmation bias, ostrich effect. It's amazing we could do any sort of analysis with those in play. My little check for understanding for you now. Can you remember each bias? Can you briefly explain them to someone? I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to see if you can quickly remember what each of those biases does to our thinking. Loss aversion, I'll give you one to start off, is when we don't want to risk what we've currently got by trying anything new. See if you can get the other 5, if you can remember them. All right, let's jump back in. Groupthink, suppressing dissenting views, going along with the group just to keep the peace, agreeing with the majority consensus. Status quo bias, avoiding new practices in favor of existing approaches. Recency bias is focusing on the most recent evidence, not longer-term trends. Confirmation bias, cherry picking your data, or the data that confirms your pre-existing beliefs. And ostrich effect, I'm blocking ostrich effect, but avoiding unpleasant or unwelcome news. Each of those can impact on any of us. There are well-recognized cognitive biases. And I wonder which biases might be working in these phrases. Let's see if you can work those out. So, for example, I don't think this is going to work, but everyone seems quite keen on it. That's probably an example of groupthink. Everyone seems quite keen on it. I'm not so sure, but I'm probably just going to keep quiet. Just take a moment. We've got 90 seconds here. See if you can spot them coming out of people's mouths, maybe even your own mouths. I'll just give you time to see if you can work out what's going on. All right, let's keep going, people. I know time is of the essence. If we go through them, I think that top left one looks to me like groupthink, or here's a classic one. I've seen this before. Tells you it's probably confirmation bias. This happened to my class last year, and you might be right, but we just have to test that theory. I try to make writing fun, but the survey didn't show that. Maybe we asked the wrong questions, questioning the survey instrument or questioning the response of the students. That's probably Ostrich Effect. I try to make writing fun, and so I'm sure I do make writing fun, don't I? But if the survey results are saying writing's not fun, that's some uncomfortable news for us, and we probably have to confront it. Students, they're not at expectations, but they are making progress. Let's keep going. It's probably status quo bias. Let's keep going with what we're currently doing. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Writing seems to have dropped off this week. There's a clue there, recency bias. I don't think our modeling is working. Sometimes one of the problems with recency bias is if you're giving up on things too soon, you haven't given them time to work, then you're probably going to discard things just as they start to work. So maybe modeling is exactly what this class needs, but you just need to do it for longer. Don't just take the most recent data as being evidence for that. Or achievement is low, but it's probably just a blip. Let's not overanalyze it. Let's move on. That might be a bit of status quo bias, but it might be ostrich effect as well. Yes, this class is achieving low, but let's not worry too much about it. That to me is a bit of ostrich effect. And let's not rush. We don't have to overhaul everything, is probably status quo bias. So here's a slightly different question for you. If we know that those biases impact on human decision-making, how can we mitigate them? How can we stop them from becoming a barrier to deep analysis? There's a range of different strategies that we can use. I don't think we'll go for the full 2 minutes on this, but again, 30 seconds with a person next to you, or jot down on a piece of paper next to you. What are some activities or group structures, things you might do in a collaborative inquiry group or within your own teaching as inquiry process, spirals of inquiry, whatever it is that you use to mitigate the impact of those biases? Let's just go for 30 seconds. I would really love to hear some of those strategies. Put them in the comments on the video, or maybe even into the chat if you're in the webinar. I've got a few ideas. I'd be probably letting the side down if I didn't have some ideas to mitigate some of these challenges. Looping back to our first webinar, the creation of a smart risk-taking culture can mitigate the impact of loss aversion if we prioritize smart risk-taking. If we create a give it a go culture, if we really emphasize small changes, make the change as small as possible. That's Dave Brailsford 1% gains, leverage the power of marginal gains. I think only using research-based interventions. I'm a research nerd. I love research, but I'm also aware that life's too short to back ideas that just sound good. We should probably use research-based ideas if we're going to not waste our time and waste our learners' time. But also something that can be a little bit comforting for people is using limited trials. Prototypes is another word to describe them. Rather than saying you are going to change your practice forever, there's no going back. That is quite risky for people. If you say we're going to give it a good go, let's give it a go for 2 weeks, or we'll use this approach for the next unit of work. And then we'll reassess. That is more likely to be successful. People dip their toes in the water knowing that if it doesn't work, they've got an exit plan. They've got a ripcord that they can pull. So there's 4 mitigations for loss aversion. You probably wouldn't use all of those, but there's some ideas to get going on. What about groupthink? Some mitigations here. This is one of my favorites. Rather than getting that first influential voice to shape decision making, instead of using think, pair, share, do think, write, share. So have a think, let's analyze some data. What do we think is going on here, or what strategy might make a difference? What are some theories of action or theories of improvement? And then write those down yourself. Just take 2 minutes in your inquiry group to write them down. And then we share what you've written down. Because rather than just changing mind at the last minute and saying, oh yeah, what Mark said, and being influenced by those dominant voices, we can genuinely share the stuff that we've written down. That is a circuit breaker to encourage genuine, diverse thought or analysis. And so that's a really good meeting strategy if you're convening teaching as inquiry groups to facilitate the avoidance of groupthink. The other thing is question routines that challenge groupthink, such as what are we missing here, or what disconfirming data is there. So disconfirming data is there'll be data that suggests a trend. Is there any data that is counter to that? You know, who's bucking the trend? What are the things that might suggest that the picture is a little bit deeper, a bit more complex than we have got in mind? Status quo bias, mitigations for that. Disaggregation is a fancy word that just means breaking stuff apart. And so rather than looking at cohort data across a whole year or a class, break it into subgroups. Break it into boys versus girls, break it into ethnicity groups, break it into ELLs versus native English speakers, and then start to see what patterns are in there. Because what might look like average on-track progress might be masking, there might be some real high flyers in your class and some kids who are really struggling. And on balance, it looks average. But if we can disaggregate and pull it apart, then we can see that actually we need to do a better job for our ELLs here, or we've got a particular underachievement for an ethnic group. And so that can snap you out of that status quo bias. Another really good routine is a stop rule. We're very good at starting things in education and teaching. We're really good at beginning stuff. We're not very good at ending stuff. So regularly say, let's use the stop rule. What do we need to stop doing? And get people used to discarding stuff that they're currently doing, the status quo. Make it comfortable for them to be able to do that. Recency bias, it's one of the mitigations here is triangulation. So don't just look at the most recent data, but so one data point is an event, but 2 or 3 is a trend. And so look at the trend. Where is this tracking over time? Where possible, triangulate. So that will get away from putting all your eggs in one basket. As I said before, some kids have good days, they have bad days. There's all sorts of reasons to explain the variance within a band. And if we're looking at a trend, then we're probably more confident that that variance is not impacting on our thinking too much. Confirmation bias. Devil's advocate role. I love the devil's advocate role. So this week it might be me who's the devil's advocate. My job is to ask tricky questions or to say, I'm not sure we've got this right. What about this? What about that? Maybe this is going on. And the rest of the team has to defend that. Next week, it might be you who plays the devil's advocate role. So we don't get the same person who's kind of negative or looking down, looking to impact on our thinking. And a very similar strategy is the red team, blue team approach. And so if one team, so form a team, and one team prepares a bit of an analysis, this is what's going on in the data, or we think step 1 should be this, step 2 should be this, step 3 should be that for implementation. If red team prepares the plan, blue team then challenges it and says, have you thought about this? What about that? I think that should go, step 2 should go before step 1. Convince me that you've got them in the right order. And then it's a way of going backwards and forwards. We're adopting roles or personas in the same way that we are in the devil's advocate. And so it's not a permanent challenge for us. But also, if you move the teams up regularly, so you use that strategy several times over the course of an inquiry cycle, but each person is, or each team is slightly different each time, then you don't get into those default roles of somebody always knocking stuff down and somebody always feeling that they have to defend it. The last one, the Ostrich Effect, trust and safety, to say it's okay. We all have good stuff and bad stuff in our teaching. Don't shoot the messenger. We're just exploring possible approaches here. That trust and safety is really important for that. But then the other one is to use student voice. Often when it comes from the mouths of babes, we're more prone to listen to that stuff. We're more prone to take challenging feedback when it comes from the kids rather than challenging ourselves. And so use lots of interview and focus group data to get the kids to answer the question, how could I improve writing for you? Or what could I do that would make a difference for you? We tend to lean more into that sort of stuff. And then the final one that I want to share with you is a lot of these can actually be countered, mitigated by the use of really robust data conversation routines. So when you put some class data down on the table, what questions do you ask? What is your routine for interrogating data? I'm going to offer you a suggestion. This is one of the takeaways from this webinar. We've got a free infographic, free download. It's called Questions to Ask When Analysing Data, and it's got 4 sets of questions. Starts with facts, like what concrete information do we have about these assessment results? What's it designed to measure? How valid is it? How reliable is it? Like if we did it on Friday afternoon, it's probably going to be less reliable than if we did it on Monday morning. And also, in terms of selection bias, who's absent, who's missing from this? First of all, just describe it, then move into interpretation. We often tend to move quickly into interpretation, but work on the facts first, and then what does it suggest to us? Can we disaggregate any obvious trends, any patterns? Have we got some theories about why those patterns exist? Moving from interpretation then to implication. So what? What does that mean? Do we need to reteach something? Do we need to find a better strategy for doing things? Which students need to be pushed on? Which need to be regrouped? And then the final one, I know I'm skipping through this pretty quickly, but you can download it and read it for yourself, is so if the implications are so what, next steps are now what? What are we going to do? What are possible next step kind of testable moves that we can try to make a difference? So we'll bring things to a close, whānau. I just want to zip back to your decision making and say those questions, those decisions that you made at the start. I want to go back. So I asked you, which one did you make using fast thinking and which one did you make using slow thinking? I just wanted to take a moment for you to reflect on the fast thinking action. There might have been bias present, some of those 6 biases present in your fast decision-making thinking. Was fast thinking the right choice for you? I'm just going to leave you there with that thought. But also to remind you that from here, we've got the 3rd webinar, which is focused on quality questions. At the heart of inquiry, having a good question will set you up for success or failure. We've got a 4th webinar on data-informed decision-making. That's really 7 guiding principles of data literacy. That's learning from big mistakes that both Coca-Cola and Kodak famously made by not using really good data literacy. And then the final one is about interventions. That's about choosing things that are most likely to make a difference, but also to implement them well. So, closing karakia. Me inoi tātou ka whakairia te tapu kia wāte ai te ara, kia tūru ki whakataha ai, kia tūru ki whakataha ai, haume huie tai kia. If you want to sign up for the full webinar series, I'll leave that QR code on the screen, but there'll also be a follow-up email that gives you all the links. We'd love to see you for the remaining 3 webinars. Mātua whānau, go well and enjoy the rest of your day.